Eoghan Corry is the editor of the Air and Travel magazine. Is it actually putting some tourists off?
Yeah, it's quite interesting and a little bit worrying. The pushback against over-tourism pre-pandemic would traditionally have been limited to places like Venice and Dubrovnik and Barcelona. What we've seen in recent weeks has been a scale of protest which took me by surprise, a lot larger than I expected, and probably the people running tourism by surprise. Traditionally, pushback against tourism has been about nuisance behaviour, drinking in the streets, noise, all of that sort of thing. And occasionally the pressure on services, health services, waste management, water, they're the things that tourism brings. And we've sort of seen a residue of that over the years. What seems to be arising very much in places where and Jackie and Amy have both alluded to it, the level of the dependence of the economy in these places, in the Balearics and in the Canarias, is very heavy on tourism. It seems to be local problems. Very much. I mean, it's employment. It's also the money that's generated. I mean, there's a lot of things said that tourists don't pay tax. They actually spend at such a level that the tax, the VAT and the other indirect taxes they leave alleviate the tax burden on the locals, but that's a separate argument. But we're back into things like lack of housing, rent prices for residents spilling over. And the big change not so much in the last few years, but probably for over the last 20 years or so, has been the nature of tourism contracting, accommodation contracting. Two things have happened. Tourists have come out and bought property there. And the second thing is that the days when Gillian Bowler or Joe Walsh had to take out a contract with a hotel are long over. Everybody who has an apartment can actually let to tourists now because of the arrival of Airbnb, Vrbo, all of those. Lots of those. So all of that, it seems a confluence of different things, that when local problems arise, and there are massive local problems, there are depopulation problems, there are rent prices, and then there was enough housing built to meet either the growing population of these places or the transient population who come in to work in tourism. All of those local problems seem to be spilling over into an anger which is a bit worrying, is going to be pushed in the face of tourists. People don't like going for a week's holidays, even if there's one night that somebody says something angry to them. And these people are, we are seeing, as you say, protests, bills, posters being put up telling tourists they're not welcome. Not the sort of message you want in an economy that's so heavily dependent on tourism. I'm not sure there's a quick solution, Andre, to it.
But particularly, Eoghan, as well, for so many Irish people. I mean, sure, we all know somebody who, has probably been to the Canaries or one of the Spanish islands or mainland Spain over the past number of weeks. Hang on, Eoghan, there for 1 second. I think we've got...
Andrea, the figures have just come back from the number of visits to Spain the first 3 months of this year. We're on course for 3 million Irish visits to Spain and the islands, considering our population. Spain is almost a domestic holiday for Irish people at this stage.
Oh, and the other point that a lot of listeners are getting in touch, I suppose they're listening in one ear to the situation and conditions for a lot of people living across the Spanish islands, and at the same time they've their holiday booked to Tenerife and Lanzarote and Ibiza and Menorca this summer over the next 2 and 3 months. If people are concerned about this, or this escalates or continues even, can people pull out, Eoghan?
If you pull out because you're concerned about any aspect of your holiday in advance, and it could be heat, protests, whatever, unless you have no comeback. You've just decided unilaterally. If the tour operator decides to cancel or the airline decides to reduce services, that's when you have a comeback. You don't even have a comeback under travel insurance. That tends to be really health related with doctors' letters, all of that sort of stuff. There isn't an automatic guarantee that you get your money back just because you change your mind. Obviously, there are different terms for different airlines, and depending on when you've booked, you will be able to get your money back, apart from a deposit from some of the tour operators. But we aren't in a situation where people can decide, oh, there are protests there, I don't want to go, and get their money back.
Do you expect this will escalate?
I'm surprised that it has gone on for as long as it does, and the nature of social media now and the ability to arouse a little bit of outrage and to get people to gather for protests, I would imagine we will see more of this. I do not expect it to impact tourism at all. I expect most people to travel to the islands and come home again without even having noticed it, apart from maybe posters or signs that go up every now and again. I think that it's largely a local issue for which is really animating people. Price of rents, cost of living, all of those sort of concerns, and the pressures that tourists bring on services sometimes comes into it as well. But I think it's a local issue between the protesters and the local authorities, of which tourists will be, to be quite honest, oblivious. They will come and go as if nothing had happened.
You know, from listening to Amber and Amy and Dean there, what would absolutely strike you is that, like, the housing situation and rental stories that we hear in this programme, they are not isolated to the Emerald Isle quite clearly. Eoghan Corry there, editor of the Air and Travel magazine.